The Insiders, proudly brought to you by Glacier by Sanlam and Time magazine. Hello and the warmest welcome to this Insider series hosted by Glacier and Sanlam. We're going to be discussing the state of the South African economy and South Africa's links to the international community and how both these phenomena influence each other. It's an important year for South Africa. It's an election year, but it's also an important moment because no less than 2 years ago, South Africa was recognized as a bona fide member of Brazil, Russia, India, and China. With these international links, South Africa is expected to be the voice and the face of Africa. But just this week, Nigeria pipped South Africa to the post as the #1 economy in Africa. And the question is, South Africa able to lead? Is it the natural leader of Africa? And how do all the international events impact the competitiveness of this economy? Those are issues that voters will be addressing ahead of the elections, and might even be a decider during the course of the elections. And these are the issues we're going to be discussing in this Insider Forum hosted by Sanlam and Glacier. We've got 3 esteemed guests who are going to be debating these issues with us. I'll introduce them to you. There is John Mauldin, who is the chairman of Mauldin Economics, and he's also a New York Times best-selling author. Seated next to him is Justice Malala. For the South African audiences, he needs absolutely no introduction. He's a writer, he's a talk show host, he's a political commentator. I dare say he's the guy who got Dina Bule fired, but that's just my personal point of view. And then we also have Michael Jordaan. He's an entrepreneur at the moment, but for the better part of 10 years, he was the CEO of First National Bank, and he's regarded as the most inventive, innovative CEO South Africa has seen in a long time. They call him the rock star CEO, and he's here with us as well. Let's start with what's happening internationally. And I'll start with you, Michael. So South Africa has one of the best stock exchanges in the world, the 17th largest. We're actually being housed by them right now. South Africa has a globally tradable currency, the rand. South Africa is a member of G20 and BRICS, and yet we've seen a volatile rand. Yet we've seen capital outflows. If South Africa's got everything going for it, what's the meaning of all these things?
Loretta, so first of all, thank you for having an unemployed banker and valuing, my few opinions. I think, like a stock exchange price, a currency is such a volatile indicator of an economy's health or a country's health that you shouldn't just look at it in the short term. And while the rand is overly volatile, and some people ascribe that to the fact that it's just a hedge or a proxy for other emerging markets, if you plot this one in the long run, it only depreciates at the inflation differentials with the emerging markets. So I tend to not get too panicky. If you listen to great investors like Soros or even Buffett, you have to be counter-cyclical. I think the rand was actually quite a good buy a while back. It's interestingly that the same has happened to the entire Fragile Five, that the carry trade is back on again and the currency is currently strengthening. But you're quite right that there are things where South Africa is excellent. The stock exchange is #1 in terms of governance. Our banking system is 3 in terms of the World Economic Forum. Our auditing profession is #1. But in those statistics, one of the things where we unfortunately always stand out is crime. We have a very, very violent society. And then another one, which I think is the cause of so many things, and that is our educational system. We just don't shape it when it comes to basic education, reading, writing, arithmetic, maths, science. And I think if there's one thing that we should focus on, it's not to have too many economic models and policy models. It's really to get education right in this country.
Justice Malala, you're a renowned author, speaker, you travel the world. What do people say to you when they think South Africa, especially now at this juncture, 20 years since democracy? South Africans would say, not a lot to be excited about.
Perceptions of South Africa globally are not what they used to be 15 years ago, 10 years ago. People look at us, people forget that after August 16, 2012, the Marikana massacre, we were on the front page of The Economist. We were the cover story, and it said South Africa is in sad decline. And that has not stopped since then. I don't mean to be here and bemoan our place in the world. I do think that we have a lot to be grateful for. If you think about what was happening 20 years ago in our country, a lot of people didn't give us a chance, didn't think that we'd be here today discussing these things in a fantastic JSE, as you say, that we have today. That said, I do think we need to manage perceptions. I think that the way we've gone out of the... think about it. We've got a deputy president who is leaving cabinet in 1 month's time, and he's leading... We have an 11-week-old platinum sector strike, which is crippling the town of Rustenburg. And we're sending someone that none of the players are listening to, and they're looking elsewhere at political power. So we need to manage perceptions of ourselves outside of this country, and I don't think we're doing that enough. So over and above with the crime, the education system, perceptions of who we are and how we do things, they're not looking good right now.
John Mauldin, is it all about perceptions, or is it something bigger than us? Quantitative easing, the withdrawal, the tapering, a decision taken by the US Feds had a direct impact on South Africa and other emerging markets. And some people say, that's why the rand is volatile, not perceptions and all these other things, because America just got better.
No, I think it's sometimes can be a glib answer to say people perceive us wrong. What people look at when they see South Africa is they see a difficult place to come do business. You have so many rules. Where's your free trade? How do we come in and set up a business? When they look at other countries that are in the emerging markets, because you're competing with not just Africa, but you're competing with emerging markets everywhere. There are many places you can go and you can set up business and you can be a shop and you can be going. And your money's free, you can take it in and out, you don't have the problems with the work rules. Because you're just trying to produce stuff. You're trying to make stuff. Now, if you're trying to tap into the South African market, that's different. But the problem there is that you have a very sophisticated business climate already serving most of South African needs. So other businesses aren't going to be able to come in and really take market share. So you have to be able to attract foreign direct investment, and that's simply how you establish your rules. And that's not a perception. That is, what are your rules? How easy are they to do? And when you make it difficult to do business, it shouldn't be a shock that business goes elsewhere. Now, going back to the quantitative easing thing, you have no control over that. That's the problem that if you look at my friend Rajan, who's now the governor of the Central Bank of India, just really laid into the central banks of the developed world and their massive quantitative easing and what are you doing to us, and said we're going to have to take control of ourselves and move back. And that's precisely what South Africa and other countries have to do. You have to recognize these big countries are going to do what they want to do, and you're responsible for your own portion of the world.
I just want to challenge you in that, and I see Justice does too. Can you clarify two things for us? What's happening economically in South Africa? Some attribute it to global variables like quantitative easing. Some are saying it's a lack of leadership or big ideas in the management of the domestic economy. For you, which one is it really?
The emerging markets, South Africa in particular, but the emerging markets in general, are suffering from a overuse of quantitative easing in Japan, in Great Britain, in the turmoil that's going on in Europe, the aftermath of too much debt in all these countries as they're having to rationalize the promises they've made to their people that they can't keep. I mean, this is, and by the way, this is going to be something that's ongoing for the next 4 or 5 years. This is going to be a very difficult environment globally because the developed world is in trouble. They're coming to the end of their road of their ability to borrow money at reasonable rates, and that means they're going to have to restructure their economies. And that's the environment that you have to work in when you're dealing on a global basis. But you still have to just say, here's our opportunities, here's what we can do. I mean, you have a wonderful country. I mean, I love this place. I've been coming here since the early 90s.
Okay,
many
so
times,
we
and I
need-
like
we
this.
need to leverage what we have.
You
So
have.
we do
You've got a
need-
lot.
we
You
do
have,
need-
you have more than most.
I call it leadership. I don't know what you call it, justice.
I think it is leadership. I'm not saying that there aren't issues that are of huge concern. It's just that even when we have the list that you mentioned, Lerato, of what is good and fantastic and great about this country, it's overshadowed by the fact that when it comes to the bad, that's what gets out, and we don't deal with that. We don't say it's a problem that people come to the mining Indaba every February, and this year the talk at the mining Indaba was, what's these guys doing? These guys don't know what they're doing. They're not talking to the labor, and therefore, look, it's going to, there's no leadership. So there are huge regulatory issues. There are huge legislative issues. There's a whole raft of new legislation that's been adopted on the last day of our parliament, for example, that's going to have massive impact, and that's going to, add on to all those issues that you mentioned about the ease of doing business in this country. But are we doing the things that we can do properly? Are we doing it correctly? No, we don't. So the perception adds on that.
I don't want Michael left out of the conversation. Michael, let's move this along a little bit. Is South Africa as competitive as it ought to be when it calls itself a global player? Lots of fanfare when South Africa entered BRICS. Lots of bells and whistles when South Africa goes to G20. But when you get there, are you playing ball, or are you just punching above your weight, South Africa?
I worked in a bank. I have to tell you, we dreamt competition every morning, every afternoon. You really had the feel that it was competitively intense. But it's interesting now that I have the perspective of looking at it from the outside. It's clear that the entire system of how we interact as an economy can be so much more competitively intense. So I'm not saying it isn't competition. We think it's competition, but it's very parochial, local type of competition. And if there really were no barriers to entry, which is happening in the technology world, for example, where it's incredibly difficult for an app started in South Africa to compete against the app that started in Silicon Valley, one of those things where there are no barriers to entry, then you start seeing how uncompetitive we are. Now, unfortunately, we have quite a long history that has led us to this. We started as a commodity-based economy, and those institutions that mine aren't really competing with each other. They just want to get the stuff out of the ground onto a boat, and they go abroad, and you're kind of dependent on the external price. Then we went through the bad old days of apartheid, and apartheid wasn't about competition. If anything, apartheid was about self-sufficiency and things like sanctions and protecting your own infrastructure. So in many ways, apartheid also stopped us from competing with the rest of the world. And much as I'm a proponent of BEE, we have to do BEE. It's part of transformation. BEE isn't inherently about competition either. So you asked me the question, I think unfortunately we can be much more competitive. The benefits of competition would be a far lower cost structure, far greater productivity, and then we would grow at much higher rates.
John Mauldin, when foreign investors look at Africa as a market, and I need to stress, Africa is not a country, it's 54 countries, we always say that, but investors don't look at it like that. They look at a continent, they see the potential of 1 billion people, a new market. Where do they start? Do they say, start in South Africa, go north, or are they saying, forget them in South Africa, they don't know what they're doing?
If you're sitting in the rest of the world, and I've said in these meetings, where they start saying, let's start focusing on Africa, because the continent's growing. I mean, it's growing faster than any other country now, and continent. And they've seen, if they missed the South American move, if they missed the Asian move, okay, don't miss Africa, please God. And then they have to decide where you go. And what they do is they start sending people out. They'll send people to Nairobi and to Joburg and to Cape Town. They'll send them to Nigeria. They'll go and look, and then they come back. And they say, what did we find? Where is it easiest to do business? And you're absolutely right, Justice. You guys have got a wonderful, huge competitive advantage over being a base to launch into the rest of Africa over other countries if you get rid of some of the competitive disadvantages that you have. 5, 6, 7 years ago, 7 years ago, I guess, I was here and I wrote a very positive article when everybody was kind of negative about South Africa, and it turned out to have been, luckily right. You've had a hell of a great run. But now you've got to, we're in a world that's changing so rapidly. You've got to keep stepping it up. You can't stop. And it goes right back to what Michael was saying. You've got to figure out how to compete globally. And to some degree, you have got to stop thinking Africa. Mm-hmm. Africa's just 1/7 of the world. Yeah. You're competing with a global world. You're competing with that guy in Vladivostok and in Belarus and in Bangladesh, that they're making stuff. And they're wanting to sell you stuff. And the world is moving to where what we're really trading is information. Yeah. And that information is going to be free, and it's going to be driving prices down. And that's where you've got to compete.
Justice, here's the curious fact. No matter what we may say about what's wrong in South Africa, and there's a lot wrong in South Africa, this country still attracts the highest levels of foreign direct investment across the African continent. Yeah. More foreign money comes into South Africa before it goes into the rest of the continent. So it seems like investors are willing to overlook crime, regulation, leadership.
I think it's the opportunity cost. It's 20 years down the line, should we be getting what we're getting? My view is that we've done fantastic work. We can sit and be self-congratulatory, and we should celebrate our 20 years. We should do all these things. But I do wonder whether we couldn't be doing double that. We couldn't be doing more than that. We shouldn't be the main, I see you're drinking a certain soft drink there.
Now, this is one of my sponsors.
A few years ago, I think Coca-Cola made the decision to go to Kenya, and the two competitors, the main ones was, do we base ourselves in South Africa or do we go to Nairobi? And the decision was, boom, they went to Kenya. I think this is where we need to stop and say, why aren't we always number one? And I'm being selfish. I'm being very South African about it. I'm saying maybe the decisions that are being made to come to South Africa are fantastic and are great, but maybe the pie would have been way bigger and would have been way more attractive.
I want to quote a tweet this week where somebody said, "It's tough being number one. Just ask number one."
It is tough, but it could be number one.
Michael, this week, South Africa lost its position as number one. Nigeria, after rebasing the statistics that inform its GDP, effectively is a much bigger economy than South Africa. If I go to the specifics, Nigeria is a $510 billion economy. South Africa is a $380 billion economy. That's not a good look.
You know, in a funny way, I think it's a good thing. This thing of like thinking we're number one and we're just going to retain that position, it also speaks about competition. Competition is a good thing. But at the same time, Lerato, I have to tell you, and I'm going to paraphrase one of my favorite Warren Buffett quotes here. He says, if you've got a lion and you call the lion's tail a leg, how many legs does the lion have?
You lost me there.
4, because it doesn't matter what you call the tail, lion's got 4 legs, okay? And the whole point, I mean, he actually made it facetiously about accountants and how they dress up financial statements and so on. I mean, you can change financial statements, it doesn't really change the company. So actually nothing has happened in Nigeria from last week to this week, other than that the statistics have changed. So I don't think one should overemphasize.
Is that not South African sour grapes? And I'll tell you why.
No, I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing that another country's number one. But I completely believe John's point. We're not competing against Nigeria. We're competing against 194 other countries in the world. That's the way we should be
A very
thinking.
smart man told me last week on the BBC that Nigeria's economic and the Nigeria's rebasing and the size of its economy is an opportunity for South African companies to discover new markets. It's a threat if foreign investments and the share of foreign investments is diverted away from South Africa into Nigeria. So the question is, at what point are you friends? At what points are you competition and rivals?
Lerato, I suppose the only point I'm making is that opportunity existed the week before as well. The fact that the numbers have changed hasn't changed the opportunity in essence. Anyone who's traveled this continent will know that the GDP of most of those countries are understated. You go to some of the markets and you see the TVs and the hi-fis and the satellite dishes that are being sold. It gives you a far better indicator of the real economic activity. So I think the smart investors know that already.
An investor who now looks at a $500 billion economy in Nigeria, looks at a population of 170 million people in Nigeria, looks at a middle class that is 20% of that number I've just mentioned. Anybody who wants to make money would be saying, I want to go to Nigeria. South Africa is a spend force.
Why? Why not both?
Because you're going to get returns of over 20% in Nigeria. You're not dealing with heavy regulation as you do in South Africa.
Okay, no, wait, you just said the magic word. Not dealing with heavy regulations, it's easy to do business. You give me a market that's 50% bigger, that's a great market, and it's easier to do business, yes, that's where I'm going to go. You make South Africa easier to do business because you've got better infrastructure, you've got all sorts of better services, you've got the things that businesses need. Just make it easy to do business. And then don't worry about, I mean, does Denmark care that Germany's bigger? Really? No. I mean, someday China will be bigger in its economic size than the United States. And I could care. They've got 4 times as many people. That means they've grown and they've prospered. Great on them. But that's not going to change how I think about what I do in America. There's a reason, going back to this competitive thing, that Texas has produced half the jobs in the United States in the last 4 or 5 years. Mm-hmm. One state. Why? Because you can come and set up business and do businesses and you don't get taxed. And if you, so there you go, boom. And that's where people are coming. And they're leaving the high regulation states and they're coming to Texas. And there's no reason that South Africa can do the same thing.
I'd like to use this opportunity now to ask our panelists just to give us their final thoughts, whether it's looking at South Africa, the global player, South Africa, a country at a crossroads ahead of the elections, South Africa in the future. Where do you think it's all going to end up?
My worldview was strongly influenced by what I saw in Silicon Valley for 2 weeks. The course I was on, the basis of it was Moore's Law. Technology doubles every 2 years. And it's not just a smartphone that's a little bit faster. It means that technology is going to do incredible things for us as consumers, but in the process be very, very destructive for jobs. Now, in South Africa, where we already have this very high unemployment rate, I think that is going to be a big issue for us. And the only answer I really see to that is entrepreneurialism and adapting. All of us have to become lifelong learners. We have to learn as if we're going to live forever. That's the way that we're going to make things happen. Clearly, for education, technology also offers huge, huge opportunity. I'm excited about the future because on a daily basis I get exposure to entrepreneurs and you can't help but feel their optimism. So my final words would be is not to worry too much about those things we read in the papers every day that are so negative. There are incredible South Africans out there. We live in an incredible country with great people who've achieved some great things. Lately not in sports, but in many, many other endeavors. So I'm excited about the country, but my message is don't wait for other people. It's up to you to do it.
I wish South Africa didn't have resources. I wish we didn't have gold, we didn't have platinum, and all these things. I think we think too much about them, and we're not doing what Singapore or I know you guys have said Japan's in debt and all that stuff. But you know, they educate their people, and I think this is where we're lacking. We need to educate more and more and more people in ways that they can see the idea of profit, that they can say that's how you create a business, and with the business will come jobs and so forth. So I think we can still do it, but we need to be single-minded about these things. We need to say there are 7 million people without jobs. Whatever we can say about inequality, 7 million without jobs leads to massive, it's poverty, and we need to break that. I think we can do it. I agree with you about the noise, but that gentleman made a very strong point about institutions. We have to make sure that institutions like the Public Protector's Office, that one shining light, are replicated, become the norm, rather than all of us. I mean, if you were to ask people here, who are you proud of? They'll say Thuli Madonsela. But we need a Thuli Madonsela. We need the outgoing Auditor General, who was amazing and fantastic. We need to have more and more and more of those institutions. And the thing to do is to encourage all of us to be whistleblowers and so forth. The one thing I don't want is for my kids to pay a bribe one day. And if I pay it, my kid will, and it becomes insidious. But I think we can do these things.
Okay. And John?
I want to follow up on 2 points. I went to the same school. Well, I got to compare notes, but I went 4 years ago. And it's 2 weeks, and you learn about accelerating technology. And this has been a theme that I've harped on for 15 years now. And what we're talking about is that the cell phone you have is 1,000 times more powerful than the cell phone you had 15 years ago. It's going to be 1,000 more times more powerful in 15 years, and 1,000 times more powerful than that, which will make it 1,000,000 times more powerful than what you have today. And that's just cell phones. That's going to happen in biotechnology, it's going to happen in robots, it's going to happen in nanotechnology, it's going to happen in communications. Everything is changing, and it is going to change faster. We're going to see more change in the next 15 years than we saw in the last entire 100 years. And so Africa, South Africa, the world, the challenge that we have is to recognize that it's an accelerating curve. It's no longer linear. Human beings think in linear terms. We grew up on the African savannas. That's where we evolved, chasing antelopes and dodging lions. And we think in terms of slow rhythms. But it's getting ready to change, and it's going to change faster than we can possibly believe. And if you take that curve and you plan for here, you're going to miss it, because the curve is going here. And we have got to figure out how to take everybody from where they think they're going to where we're going to be going. And you're worried about jobs, and you should be. It is going to change things. But in the United States, in 1850, the #1 job was agriculture workers, something like 85%. The #1 job 50 years later, because 30% of the people lost their agricultural jobs in a period of 20 years from the one machine, the McCormick Reaper. We're going to see changes like that. So yes, there are going to be jobs lost. But what happens is, if you give people the chance, if you give the human being who's got that spirit an opportunity to go create for himself, that's what they'll do. And so it's unleashing the entrepreneur. It's giving them the tools, the education, and the freedom to do it. And we'll all be just fine, because the world's going to be incredibly better. We're all going to live longer, and we're going to have more.
Thanks so much to you, Michael Jordaan, to you, Justice Malala, to you, John Mauldin. You've been watching a special edition of the Insider series hosted by Sanlam, Time, and Glacier. And we've been talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly that make up South Africa as the country reflects on 20 years of democracy. We've heard that there's so much potential that the country can harness in its people by educating them, in its entrepreneurs by giving them space to operate, and also in its leaders if they focused on institutions and governance. But more importantly, that South Africa is a global player if it just positions and focuses its mind in that narrative of the world at large and not South Africa insular.